I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, Season 3, recorded on October 5th, 2017. Theme Thursday is a Gallup webcast series that dives deep into the CliftonStrengths themes one at a time, and today's theme is ideation. If you have questions or comments during this live webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. If you just look down there below, there's a chat room down there, easy to log into, bottom left-hand corner. It'll say login. Choose that. Choose the guest account. Don't create an account. Just choose the guest account. Put your name in where it says guest. Take those numbers out. Hit submit. You'll be in there. And you can ask your live questions during our program. Also works on your mobile phone if you want to do it that way as well. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions, we do that as well. If you want to send us an email, you can do that, coaching@gallup.com. And actually, that's a great email address for any questions that you have. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaches, resource, and training needs. You can also catch this video and all the ones we've done in the past, including downloadable audio, which is really called a podcast. Many of you are catching on to the podcast. You can subscribe to those on your phone, recapture that time in a train, on a plane, or in a car. By the way, Maika, I made Parade Magazine for saying that. I should talk about that here.
Whoa, talk about that right now.
Yeah, Parade Magazine. So if you go to the online version, there's someone talking about podcasting, and they interviewed Dave Jackson, a friend of mine, and myself, and I said that quote, and they wrote it up, and it's in Parade Magazine. So if you can check that out, parade.com. Pretty interesting, but podcasting, a great way to recapture that time. So get that done. If you have any questions, head out to our coaches blog, our growing coaches blog. Maika runs that, coaching.gallup.com. Maika Leibbrandt is our host today. She works as a workplace consultant at Gallup. She's a mom too. Maika, great to see you, and welcome to another Theme Thursday.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
Good to have you. We have ideation, which besides woo is my number 2 favorite, I think, for me, 7 here. And if you're in the chat room, we'd love to know what number it is for you. But we have ideation today and a great guest, and we're going to talk about that. But Maika, you have some work that you need to do through our companion guide. So if you haven't downloaded the companion guide yet, we'd love to have you do that. Maika's going to give us an overview of what ideation is.
Certainly. Part of the reason we do this is really to help folks fall in love with all 34. And I think that is something at first, when I said that, I thought, if you're going to be a coach, you've got to fall in love with all of them. As I've worked with CliftonStrengths, I've realized that no, if you're a great human who's going to be on this planet with people who are different than you, which is all of us, you really should make some effort to understand where each of these are coming from. Today, we're talking about ideation specifically from a leadership standpoint, and I can't wait for you to hear what our guest has to say about it. But before we get to her, I'll just go in and make sure that we truly understand what this theme is. Ideation is a strategic thinking theme, and it is all about 2 things, really. It's about coming up with new ideas that have never existed before and connecting ideas where those connections had never been obvious. If you read the companion guide, you'll find that long definition. A couple pieces I like to pull out there. It's pretty simple. You're fascinated by ideas if you have high ideation. An idea is a concept, the best explanation of the most events. As I was reading this for, the millionth time, yesterday, I picked out things that I hadn't seen before. You'll notice a little bit in this long definition, really about that ability to find new ways or new takes on things, and almost to communicate things in a crystallized way. I like this phrase here: an idea is a connection. Yours is the kind of mind that's always looking for connection. So you are intrigued when seemingly disparate phenomena can be linked by an obscure connection. So different than something like analytical, where you're boiling it down to the lowest common denominator, or the sort of fact-based factor. What ideation is doing is looking for what hasn't been thought of, or what could be similar here that maybe other people had missed. What's strangely enlightening. What's a new or a different angle on a concept that we haven't had before? Others might label you as creative or original or conceptual or even smart. And I do think all of these themes bring their own kind of smart. Ideation, I think, brings a different smart. It is about something creative, something that maybe we haven't been down that road. It's an obscure smart. I feel like I can say that because I have it, number 4. But perhaps you are all of those types of smart who can be sure. The at the end of the day, I think about ideation as, I'm sure I've said this before, a constant popcorn popper of ideas that just never runs out. It doesn't mean that every single idea is going to be good, but it does mean that you can count on the number of ideas and on the energy that comes from creating and connecting. Let's talk about what ideation looks like in a leader. If for an individual contributor, ideation is about discovering new angles or new concepts, as a leader, ideation can be helping other people see those, or helping other people see beyond maybe what's right in front of them, beyond what's obvious. Fresh and new are words that often you might use with creativity or with ideation itself. That can also, think about what those concepts of fresh and new could also mean to people who follow you. It could mean relevant. It could mean exacting. It could mean that ideation equips you to be able to communicate with a diverse group of people or a diverse team in a way that speaks to them each. It's not individualization. It's not picking up on the differences between people and then customizing your communication. It is more about looking at the nucleus of that idea, really saying, okay, what is it that's interesting that could connect to something interesting in another one of these people I need to communicate with? Because it is ideation, I'm taking the liberty to make up a word. So I'll warn you here. I think one thing that leaders with great ideation can do is think about tailoring messaging or ideas in its most absorbable form. Not a word, but it is today because I just used it. So it's really not just, hey, I said it and you heard it. I think leaders with ideation can say, I said it and apparently that didn't jive with you, or I'm leading you through some change, and maybe I can see as a leader that is connected to something we've already done before. Different than maybe somebody with context would do, where they would say, okay, here's where we've been, and really focus on history. What somebody with ideation could do during times of change is really find those links where everybody else might think what the change is a brand new frontier, or is a software development, or is a download, or is a new person to the team that's just absolutely out of the blue. I think ideation loves out of the blue, but can always ground it with that ability to connect, to be able to say, hey, most of this, yes, is new and different, but pieces of this you're already comfortable with. So again, thinking about how can you put others at ease and really be able to say, here's the way that I know you need to hear the message. It's really just, I think, a focused angle of channeling that creativity toward the people that you lead. Ideation can be playful. You don't have to search very hard to find something novel if you have high ideation. It probably isn't going to take you real long to find a different angle. And that kind of mental Play-Doh play, that kind of mental stretching and bending away from what's expected, can be really fun. And it can be fun for others too, as long as you invite them in. So think about the connection between ideation and hospitality. Ideation can be an inviting piece where you say, let's just brainstorm, or you out loud maybe say, hey, we don't have to commit to any of the ideas we come up with here. Let's just think. That kind of invitation to bring others who don't normally think that way to that cool creative space with you can be a phenomenal gift that you give to them. You might want to do it out loud though. Otherwise, your ideation can lose people who don't think that way. It can feel exclusive, and it happens incredibly fast typically. So it can be something that can be a little bit jarring. Not everyone's going to anticipate what you're anticipating or follow what you're putting down. So I think learn how and when to lead others into your ideas. It's not always going to be necessary. It's not always going to be possible, but there might be times in order perhaps to build trust that you need to maybe drop some breadcrumbs of some ideas that are there. We talked about really these, the two real core aspects of ideation, creating and connecting. It's about what's genuinely new. I think out of all 34 themes, ideation is the one that is probably most close to a common definition of creativity. Now, you can be creative with a lot of different themes. If you have input, you can be creative by bringing in information to an idea that nobody else had on the team. Or if you have includer, you can be creative by thinking about how this might affect a different kind of population. If you have ideation, your version of creativity is genuinely creating a thought that hadn't existed before. And that, in many ways, is sort of the infinite magic of ideation. But the other side to it is connecting. What's an extension of something that's already familiar? Challenge yourself to see both sides of how your brain works around this, and think about maybe incubating or working on how you can be good at both connecting and creating. The last thing I want to talk about is those 4 needs of followers. So I alluded to this slightly just now, but a leader with ideation could build trust by clarifying when you're brainstorming and when you've committed. That also means clarifying when you're about to ask for a commitment from someone else. And that might say, it might be something as simple as saying, I want to invite you to this meeting. The purpose of the meeting is just to come up with as many ideas as we can, and realize that that's not something that most people are ever going to host a meeting to do. Realize that that is a gift, that is something that might be different and fun and exciting. And also make sure that you close the loop. And if a great idea comes up in that meeting that you decide you do want to execute upon, be crystal clear about making that a priority that we are actually going to move forward with. A leader with ideation might build stability or provide stability for others through that connection idea. How can you help other people be more comfortable with the unknown by filtering it through what they know? I think this is a great challenge for folks with ideation, a great place to really target your ideation on the idea of creating stability. I might walk into a brand new, let's say stability. Let's say I'm going to use this idea of change, but let's say I'm walking into a brand new place I've never been before, say a new airport I've never traveled through. It can feel really terrifying. It can feel like everything's different. A new grocery store across town. I did this the other day. It was the same brand I always go to, but you know what? Everything was in a different place. That can feel terrifying. And those kinds of change, that happens to people at work. That happens to people in your family. It happens to people in your community all the time. You know what I did in that grocery store, or I've done this in new airports as well, was I had a couple anchoring points. I wanted to know, where is the fresh produce? Where is the restroom? And where am I going to check out? Right? And ideation, I think, can pick a couple of those nuggets and say, okay, well, this is either the same or different from what I already know. So there's an anchoring point. And ideation can pick apart a concept and be able to say, okay, there are some connections here. I think that is an activity in creating stability. And the way that you'll go about it with ideation is very different than how somebody else might do it. A leader with ideation might use it to build compassion by learning people's stories so that you can connect them to where we're going. And in many cases, a leader's job is to push people beyond where they currently are. And I think you could, even using phrases like, hey, have you ever considered this? Or how did this come up for you in the past? Thinking about being able to help people see themselves in where they're going, I think says, hey, I hear you, I see you, and I care that this might be difficult for you. And finally, ideation can create hope by inviting people into that glorious what if zone. I think ideation loves just the opportunity to say, let's throw off all the bounds of reality for a second, and let's just talk about what could be. Make it safe, make it inclusive, also make it non-binding if you can. Create this safe space where you're not asking for commitment, and realize that might throw people, especially if you're working with people who love action. But I think that space to say there's bigger thoughts to be had out there, there's a better future to be had out there, and we can get there. It's just an exercise in leading people through that thought process. A beautiful theme. Personally, it's probably the theme that I can remember seeing in myself for the longest. I think about even myself as a very young kid. I noticed this. It was a lot of just thinking differently than everybody around me, and exercising that has been a really fun challenge, and certainly has probably shown up in a lot of what you hear on Theme Thursday. I've had people say, "Oh, where did you get that?" or at one point, I remember somebody in a competition that I was in when I was young say, "How'd you come up with that idea?" And I thought that was the strangest question you could ever ask, because I was dumbfounded. I was probably 9 years old. And I remember thinking, well, I just thought. I just came up with it. It didn't come from anywhere. And that's the beauty and power of ideation. But without further ado, I can't wait for you to meet one of my favorite other ideators, Maureen Monte. Maureen, welcome to the program.
Aw, thank you, Maika. Thank you, Jim. Delighted to be here, as you know.
Excellent. It's great to have you. Maureen, for people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Gosh, I wasn't ready for that question.
Hopefully
I
it's an
was
easy one.
Yeah, no, it totally is. I've been working with a strength finder for 12 years. And from the very beginning, working with teams. And I do love, as you were speaking about some of the characteristics of ideation, the complexity, and it helps. I love the simple goal of a team is to be successful at whatever it is they need to do, but it's so complex to get from A to B. And my ideation does love resolving that complexity down to its basic steps so that the team reaches its full potential. I've got a background in engineering and a background in leadership, and was exposed to Strength Finder through my background in leadership. And I do feel like it's been my secret rocket fuel forever. But it's also, and as you guys know, and if the people listening are familiar with some of the statistics associated with the frequency of strengths in the general population for the top 5, it's lower, and it's also lower for women than men, right? So while it has been my secret weapon in many cases, it has also been the reason that people come after me with a hammer. Right. So I do feel that there's a need to regulate ideation, or have learned that there's a need to regulate ideation so that it's useful to the situation. If the strength is unproductive in the moment, in the environment, in the situation, unproductive or ineffective, it's the wrong thing to use. Right. And in fact, I can give you an example of a client of mine who has ideation in his top 5, and he's a pastor at a church. And I'm near Detroit, and classic cars are big. And every August, 2 million people come from all over the world to look at our classic cars, drive up and down this big avenue called Woodward. And as part of his ideation, he said, I'm going to preach on a Sunday night, and people can bring their classic cars to the parking lot, and I'll just talk to them, and they can sit in their classic cars, and I'll, do my sermon. And it's such a great idea, right? And he did have great ideas. He took a new role in a parish, or whatever it's called, closer to Detroit, and realized that blight was coming in their direction. And his idea was, let's go face it. Let's go attack it head on. Let's help these people. Let's prevent things from getting worse. And he had me come in and work with his team. And the goal of the workshop was to help understand their strengths and then aim it towards executing the ideas that they had come up with, right? And as we started, he said, I've got an idea. We hadn't thought of this before. And you could see the whole room kind of deflate. And they didn't need more ideas at this point. And he stood up, and of his own volition, I give him so much credit for this. And he said, I'm going to leave the room. You guys figure out the execution and where we go from here. And he turned to me and he said, they're in your hands. I said, perfect. And off he went. So to his credit, he realized in that moment as a leader, ideation was destabilizing the team, right? And that can happen. You do have to be in an environment, and I have learned this, if you're in an environment that does not value ideas, ideation is useless to those people or to that situation. And so sometimes if you're dealing with a leader with like discipline or deliberative, where their alarms are going off as you have a new idea. And to your point about being able to communicate it, I think that's essential. That everybody's welcome. It's not in cement. Could we have some ideas? Or saying, are you open to new ideas? And if the answer is no, then I need to keep my mouth shut. So over the years, I've learned that.
I love that, not only as a way to really use ideation in its most mature form, but I think what you also illustrated is something everybody almost, I'm sure everybody deals with this at some point, but the struggle to think that as a leader, I need to play all roles. Literally leaving the room when what was needed was something I didn't naturally bring. What a beautiful statement to say, I can be the person who gets you thinking, and I don't have to be the same person who gets you executing.
Exactly. And he honored the strengths of the people that worked for him, who needed what they, to do what they need to do. And ideation at that point was not helping. And I love ideation. I mean, the 3 of us before we were preparing, 3 people with ideation, and think about how we were behaving, which was absolutely fun and hilarious. But imagine someone with discipline or deliberative listening to that, right? And it just would not have been as much fun for them, not even if we didn't invite them in, but because that's not their idea of a good time. Right?
Well, let's say a little bit more about that. So Maureen and I had a prep call yesterday. We both have ideation. It was different than most prep calls I usually have with our guests. We got together and just asked each other questions. And Maureen, some of the questions you asked me, I had never thought about before. And I'm a professional question asker. And so it was just super helpful way to invest in ideation is just, hey, let's think about this from a different place.
Mm-hmm. I call that ideation jazz, right? We are riffing. I'm riffing, you're riffing, we riffed, we were riffing, the three of us were riffing, right? Like musicians, right? And it was together, not on top of one another, but together, right? So there's an element of vertical thinking that ideation brings that I think is joyful. And that's where the humor comes in my opinion, is that builds humor. That creates humor. Right?
I just had a really fun experience. I was in DC this week and reached out to the community, said, hey, if anybody wants to, if you got a few minutes and you want to meet for coffee, I'm open. I'm in the DC area. And Chris reached out to me. So we got together for coffee, 30 minutes. He started talking about what he does. And immediately for me, ideation kicked in. And I started thinking, because I asked him, oh, how are you using strengths in your environment? Do you guys have a coach? What kind of things do you do? And immediately for me, that was one of those things. But I do like to ask, like, do you want this? Because like I've got a bunch of ideas that are coming out here, and we kind of thought through some ideas of how they could take it to the next level in what they're doing. Right? He had mentioned, yeah, we're watching Theme Thursdays. We're going through some stuff. We're filling some stuff out. And I thought immediately I started thinking, how can we take it to the next level? But Maika, I think super important is that you ask often, in some situations, and not just blast. Because we can just blast a bunch of ideas. I think I mentioned this in season 2 or season 1, but Jody, my partner here in recruiting, she will use me intentionally. She's like, all right, I'm stumped. I need a few ideas. Give me 3. And then she'll tell me what the problem is. She'll let me think for a minute, and then I'll start talking. And she listens and writes. And then at some point, she'll go, stop. Like, I'm good. I got it. And hey, good. I'm done. I've done my job here. And for someone with high ideation, especially in terms of leadership or in leading in directions, leading directions of a program, or it feels really good just to get those things out. But we have that relationship where she tells me, done, stop. I don't stop. Good. I have responsibility. She needs to move on. And so that's a great way. Those are some great ways, I think, for folks that have it, especially in those public situations like this pastor, to say, okay, I'm gonna walk out. So Maika, back to you.
Jim, is it okay for somebody just to drop in like that and say, give me your ideas? Or do they need to prepare you in a different way?
No preparation needed. Let's just start talking, and my brain will start. People who are good at watching body language will pick up on this very quickly. And they'll notice my eyes move away from them, and I'm, they're flickering, as I'm downloading the matrix to my mind, as I'm thinking, like, how can I learn this just as fast as I possibly can, so the eyes kind of flicker a little bit. But no, Mike, at least for me, now, those are my themes, right? Because there's other things that play into this. And so I have activator high. So I'm okay with, let's get some ideas. Let's get it around people. I have a ranger number 1. Let's come up with some programs. Like, let's make this thing happen. We can go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. Not everybody's built that way. So it plays itself out differently, I think, for others.
Maureen, I'm curious, as a leader and as a coach, so maybe think about how this has worked out for you in both ways. How do you use that? Jim said, ask, not blast. How does ideation become something that helps you lead other people to where they want to go versus just giving them 100 ideas of what you think they should do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, everything that I do as a leader and as a coach is associated with what success looks like for them. So that's where I start. Where are we? What are we trying to achieve? Why are we even here? Right? I mean, knowing your strengths is like knowing your IQ. So what? What are you doing with it? And so, I mean, me having an idea is not helpful if we don't know what direction we want to run in, right? But I feel like Jim, in terms of the natural instinct, my ideation is subject neutral. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't need to know anything about it, and I will have ideas on what we should do. Right now, they may not be the best ideas, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday. That our energy goes with where our ideas are, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And sometimes it's my idea and your idea, and somebody else's practicality. In fact, when I was with IBM, and I had a great boss, his name is Ed Brunner, and he's done a lot with me still in creating collateral. And I want to talk about this a little bit later. How it is my innovator, but I need this practical person to help me, right? But when I worked for him, and this was before I knew his strengths, because eventually, of course, I had to make him take Strength Finder. We were inside an automotive client, and the environment inside this automotive client was combative at best. We'll just use that word. It's a nice word for it. It was way worse than that. But, and we were having trouble convincing them that the work that we were doing for them was valuable. And so as my boss was telling me what the challenges were, I said, well, we need a newsletter. He goes, a newsletter? I'm like, oh yeah. And I said, I've written other newsletters. I'll write it. I can shoot it. Once we start communicating in a written form, in a story form, the value of the things we're doing, they'll catch on very quickly, right? That this is helpful. And I said, we'll engage them too, which is part of the reason I liked the idea. And he said, he is analytical. I need a hypothesis of why the newsletter is the right thing to do. You know, me and my ideation, I'm like, a hypothesis? That is the silliest thing I've ever heard, right? I said, my hypothesis is we need a newsletter. It's short and simple. Right? He goes, no, you come back with a hypothesis. So I had to go Google what a hypothesis meant because I couldn't think of what I needed to do to satisfy him. And in the end, we did it, right? And it was extremely successful. And here's where the payoff is for people with ideation. It wasn't my boss was happy with me. It wasn't that I got my paycheck. Of course, that was important. But the clients began to come to me after the second or third one, began to come to me and say, got an idea for our newsletter. I'm like, cool, let's sit down and talk about it. So this became a collaboration tool where we improved our engagement. They understood our value, my value better, their value better, and how our partnership value better. So it was tremendous.
You created an ideation platform.
Yes.
It seems like you probably naturally, everything you touch becomes an incubator for ideation, but maybe for others, you needed that channel, that obvious place of here's where you can put your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I needed his practicality, that hypothesis thing I had to write. And I was going to look it up before I came on to see if I still had it. Because it was like 8 years ago, was helpful, but I resisted it, right? I didn't want that boundary. And, but it was helpful. So those are good partnerships, and he's still a great partner to me today.
Have you used that similar idea in other ways, thinking about how to make ideation helpful or palatable for other people?
Yes, I mean, in the end, although as a team and leadership consultant, they're paying me for my ideas because they've got problems they can't solve. Right? I'm not the typical individual person needs coaching kind of person. I do that as part of my bigger scheme, but they know that I will help them creatively solve their problems. Right? And my platform, my starting point is StrengthsFinder, but that's never where we're ending. And I even, and this is kind of more towards my innovation part of the conversation of how I use ideation. My platform for building winning teams is not it. I make my clients do pre-work. I ask them to do pre-work. And my idea is if they do pre-work, they will have a better experience with me. And of course, they always do. Not everybody does it, but when they do have a better experience. I have these tremendous, and this is a lesson for coaches, right? In my opinion, the work that I do with clients isn't just the StrengthsFinder and then a conversation, even at the team level. The pre-work I do, that I have them do, and the pre-work that I do, you should see, and this is part of my partnership with my former boss, Brenner, you should see the tool he's helped me create that creates a hierarchy of the organization, and then the way we present the team results to these people, right? It's absolutely fabulous. But when I work with them, whether it's individual or a team, the amount of pre-work I do to accelerate the learning curve and the acceptance and the understanding of the results of their strengths and aiming it towards what success looks like. What problems are we trying to solve here, right? My work is beautiful, and I will sit down and it's visually appealing, and that's where my boss has helped me with his natural gifts. But I will write pages of analysis for them prior to our ever meeting. And so my value proposition goes up, and this is the innovator part of it, because I've added so much more value than here are your strengths. Here's your insight guide, which I love all that stuff, and I use all that stuff. But what do I bring is, having worked with this tool for 12 years, I bring more than just the insight guide and your top 5 or 34 and all of it, right? So between the analysis I do at the individual and team level and the way it's presented is a powerful, innovative way to help them absorb their natural, the talents that they have in the room there, and drive it towards some sort of measurable outcome.
And I think everybody needs to do that, right? If we're really going to be great purveyors of strength, it's start with a tool, but then put your own spin on it. But the specific ideation piece is, I'm going to add something that nobody's ever thought of before. I'm going to add value. I'm going to add insight. I'm going to give you ideas that maybe you didn't have.
And that's what they want from me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad to give it. And I'm going to show my book as part of my show and tell. In my book, Destination Unstoppable, in the back is a complete roadmap for leaders and coaches. So how you do this process. It's my process. It's a subset of what I do, but I want people to try this process. But I've also got forms that are templates for that people can fill out that drive the conversation deeper than your insight guide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's value add. And that's innovation that I've brought to the table as a leadership consultant, as a person that's been in the big corporate world, as a person that's worked with small companies as well, and sports teams. And in the end, it's a people problem. What do we need to do, right? And how do we harness the talent in the room to solve the people problems that are preventing us from achieving our key business metrics?
So, Maureen, when you were submitting your application video to be the guest for Ideation this season,
Yes.
You told me it was your favorite theme and that you really wanted this to be the one that you talked about. What is it that sets Ideation apart from everything else? Because I think a lot of your work comes from not just your ideation, but what is it that you love so much about this one?
I think the freedom of ideation. There is no boundary, right? For individualization, I need to know the person. I have to generally, or I need to watch them and watch them on TV, whatever. So there's a boundary there. There is absolutely, because it is internal. And I've got 2 other thinking strengths: strategic, learner, achiever, ideation. I own maximizer. So it's all this in my head is this joyful explosion of wonderfulness. And I find that it manifests itself in 3 ways: reactive, proactive, and then as a lifesaver. So a reactive ideation is when I'm in a situation with a client or in a circumstance where we've got an issue that we can't quite resolve right here, and how are we going to resolve it? Then my ideation kicks in. So can I give you a quick story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So in 2000, year 2000, something like that, and this is when I was still working as a professional photographer, I had the opportunity to was asked to photograph 2 sports heroes. Willie Horton, who was part of the Detroit Tigers 1968 World Series team. And I remember that with great joy because my father and I enjoyed baseball, and he passed away shortly after that, right? So I had this connection to that team that's different. And then the second sports guy was a man named Darren McCarty. And if you ever want to see Darren's contribution to the universe, just Google Darren McCarty and Claude Lemieux, and you will see the battle of the decade on the ice. And somebody had hurt one of our guys, and Darren McCarty is going to get retribution and learn him a lesson. So I just figured we'd do this. They were going to have a charity softball game, the old Tigers against the current Red Wings, going to play softball. And I just figured these 2 guys who were going to be our poster child to generate publicity would come in and be thrilled to meet one another, and we'd just take a picture, right? And that's not what happened. In fact, they went to like opposite corners of the room. And I'm like, are you 2 going to come over here? We're going to take your picture, right? So Willie Horton went for the food. My brother reminded me of that yesterday. And Darren just kind of stood there. So I eventually got them closer together, and they're facing me. I'm like, this is not working. There's nothing engaging about this. And so then I had them shake hands. That didn't work, right? There was nothing. They were awkward. And if you think about it, it's hockey, baseball. They're not related. There was an age difference between Darren McCarty and Willie Horton. Willie Horton's African-American. Darren's Caucasian. You're like, okay, these people are not connecting. So I thought about my life as a baseball player, and I did play baseball. And when you play baseball, to decide who goes first out on the field and who bats first, you would throw the bat at the other person. They grab the barrel, and then you'd go like this until someone got to the top of the bat, and that person gets to choose. You didn't flip a coin. It was this procedure. Do you agree, Jen? Right? And so that's what we did. And I had these guys do that with one another. And so what I was doing I had not done StrengthsFinder. I was tapping into their competition, right? So let me show you the outcome of that. This is show and tell. This is the outcome. Can you see that?
Push it back just a little bit. Oh, there you go.
Okay,
Awesome.
so there's Darren McCarty and Willie Horton interacting with one another as they bring their, who's going to get to go first. And you can see little fingers. You can see, you're trying to get to the last person, to be the last person to touch the bat at the top. And that's what we did. And that became then the poster child for the poster for the event. And those two had a blast. And the only thing I would fix, this is my maximizer kicking in. See Darren McCarty's watch? That's very distracting to me. So that should not have been in the photograph. And then at the game, here's a picture of Willie Horton. Can you see his the bead of sweat coming down his face?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is classic hero. When there were riots in Detroit, he went out of the ballpark to try to stop them. This man's a hero. So anyhow, that was my, in the moment, we didn't have a dire situation story, but it was time to be creative, right? And that worked, and man, we got it. And I was so grateful because everybody's looking for a photographer at that point, right? You're the one taking the picture. You figure out how to make these people talk. One more quick story, actually two, if I can, in terms of proactive ideation. So as you guys know, because I've constantly reminded you that I've spent $1 million with Gallup, something I'm very proud of. 85,000 to be total for my journey of where I was before I did leadership and business ethics and Gallup and all my coaching. It's 85K, but look where I am. I'm so thrilled, right? So I would come to, before you were certifying people like me, I would come to the Gallup Great Workplace of Choice events. I worked for IBM. I would pay my own money and come to listen, to learn. It was how I learned. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to all these great workplace of choice people talk about the using Strength Finder and Q12 and all that sort of thing. And it dawned on me, ding, idea. If we were to go, and I was still working for my boss, Ed Brenner, inside of IBM, at IBM, inside the automotive company. And I said, if I were, they'd been bankrupt, things were a disaster at this automotive company. And so therefore they were never very good at complimenting one another. There was no encouragement. So I went back and I showed my bosses the Q12 and I said, what if we just did this one? If somebody tells somebody else, you've done a great job. If we start telling the client they've done a great job, what would change? And so I began to do that. And they did, if they did good work, I'd be like, that is excellent work. I think this is going to be perfect. Let's figure out how to present it. But I was always giving them a compliment towards when it was good work. And that changed the dynamic between the whole partnership of that client and who we were, their vendor, right? And it was a very powerful and good, in my opinion, good example, combined with the newsletter, the kind of things we were doing to build a true partnership. And I do like using my ideation for building strong partnerships, right? And my last one, and then I'll stop and see if there's any questions, is my ideation is a lifesaver. And what I mean by that is it, in a dire circumstance, it saves my day, right? At least I think it does. I'm not sure everyone feels that way, but so a few years ago, there was a very large company here in where I work. I live in Oakland County. It's a very big county. And this is the largest employer in Oakland County. And they were having a three-way merger with two other companies. And it wasn't going very well. And at the top level, they asked me to come in and help them with the partnership of this merger. And I'd already had one at the top level go very well, series of workshops, individual coaching. And then this was the next level down. And the man I was meeting, and this was the first one out of 13 that I had to do, worked with children. And he had strengths like developer, empathy, harmony, and relator in his top 10. So I thought I was going to meet this delightful man. Well, this delightful man sat down across from me. And I said, so, sir, what'd you think of your results? And he lit into me. I didn't know it, but I was standing under a guillotine and it came down. He lit into me on my complete lack of knowledge of Freud, of who did I think I was to know how he would answer all those questions. And first of all, I'm surprised, but I'm like, okay. And I thought, well, I said, I am a strengths expert, but I am not a psychologist, and I'm not Freud, and I'm not here to do that. I'm here to talk about how we're successful as part of this merger, right? But he wouldn't give up, and he came at me, and So I pulled out the analysis, that beautiful analysis that I'd done for him in his 34. It looked something like this, right? It's a full page of my comments, his results, and he doesn't have it with him. He does not wish to discuss it. So I said, did you read your insight guide? Doesn't have it, does not wish to discuss it. So now I'm thinking, these people are paying me a fortune, and we're getting absolutely nowhere. And this is the first of 13. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? It's either quit and do nothing, or I had an idea. And so I took that same chart of information and I turned it over and I said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And he didn't mind. And I began to ask him questions about what he thought was at the root of some of the trouble with the merger. And he answered, and I would ask another, kind of like you and I just, Maika, we were asking one another questions, right? It was very open, and I was actually interested in his point of view. And that went on for 45 minutes. And at that point, I had nothing else, right? I'm like, fine, we're not going to talk about strengths. I've got what I've got from you. And so he actually, as it ended, by the way, he called me a bimbo, and he said I wasn't much of a looker. So all this stuff coming at me, right? And I'm like, I hadn't been called a bimbo in like years, and not much of a looker. Yeah, okay. I'm not Miss America. I didn't sign up for Miss America. I'm a strengths coach, right? And I'm a team consultant. So at the end of it, I've taken all these excellent notes, and he looks at me and he goes, "Are those for me? My notes?" I'm like, "No, those are not for you." And I left it at that. And rather, I wanted to say a whole lot more other words, but I left it at that. But my idea to let me interview that guy, right, turned out to be very helpful. One last point about this from a coaching standpoint. Now I am the hired outsider. Now I have to decide, do I tell the people at the top that this was my experience with this man? Okay. And I thought about it, and there was one major reason and one minor reason. The major reason I decided to tell them was we had a team workshop coming up. If this guy acted up in that, I wanted them to know that it was coming. I didn't want it to be a surprise for them like it was for me. So if he was disruptive in the team, I wanted to cut that off. And then 2, my thought was, this guy's client facing. Who else is he treating like this? His clients, the other people that work with him, right? So I decided to tell them, and they were mortified and blamed it on his age and whatever. And I didn't care. And by the way, he was fine in the workshop. And then he waited till everybody left. The room was empty, and he came back. And I wanted to play like Jaws music. Here he comes, And he gave me another round of what was wrong with me. But you know what? This is where individualization is handy. I thought it was hilarious. I wish I had a movie of this whole thing, because he was so ridiculous that it was truly humorous. I was not offended. I could have cared less, other than what an interesting man, right? And why is he working in that role, frankly? So
Maureen, you know what I hear from that story specifically? It sounds like ideation is one of your places that you go in order to engage. If all else fails, that coming up with ideas or exploring the ideas that other people have, that's going to connect you to where you need to be. Is that true? Is that something you experience?
I think that's a great way of saying it. And if you think about my low relating talent, and it really is low, I have individualization and relator in my top 10 and nothing else. Everything else is at the bottom, practically, right? Empathy, harmony, includer. That's why that guy yelling at me or whatever he said, I have low harmony. I don't care, right? Mm-hmm. It's funny. I do think when we connect over the mind meld kind of thing is a lot more fun for me than your typical social. I don't have woo like Jim does, right? I don't have many of the social gifts that other people have. And so to connect at an intellectual level about how to solve a problem and play that back and forth with them, that's how I really do enjoy that. And it's, by the way, the only way I'm able to drive business. I'm not a big seller, right? But to speak with a creative mind about the possibilities of us working together, of what that would look like, that works every time for them and for me.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love that. So proactive, reactive, and save the day.
Save the day.
I with my own ideation, I found times that I can very easily, I don't experience information overload, but I do. Sometimes my brain will be like, this is not important, so I'm not going to listen. If I know that I need to,
yes,
I will start to take notes, but I won't take notes about what's being said. My notes will be, what is this making me think of? So I'll teach, in fact, next week, I'm teaching a 4.5-day strengths course that I've taught a lot. And sometimes it would be easy for and it's high strategic too. Like I know what I need and I can get in and get out and not take too much else. It would be easy sometimes for me to just kind of zone out. But instead, what I look forward to more than anything is taking notes of what the coaches in that course are saying, because then that leads me to somewhere else, someplace new, some other thing that we can think about. And every morning when people are asking questions about what they learned the day before, I have at the top of my notes page, which by the way is written in different colors and sideways and not in an orderly fashion at all, blog topics. Like, here's what we need to talk more about. And sort of that activity of let me just listen for ideas and come up with them at the same time. It makes me so much more present.
Wow. So look at that. It's a survival strategy in an environment where you're not.
It's like it's a save the day and proactive and reactive all at the same time.
Which is wonderful, right? Yeah. Well, that's a great example, Maika.
You know what I hear the two of you saying, and it's just as you were talking, Maureen, as you were talking through this, I was thinking, you know, the ability to ask great questions is really the superpower of ideation. We haven't really thought about it in that way. We think about these ideas we generate, but Maureen, you said several times, and Maika, even in what you said, that it's in its maturity and its state where it's being most helpful. It's just not this spewing out of concepts or this spewing out of, you know, Disneyland rides, right? It is a product. It is a very productive. It is a very helpful. It's a tool that can be used in the context of asking great questions. Yeah. And I think for someone with ideation to be helpful, they have to not just talk but also listen. And, you know, be able to, Maureen, you said you turned that paper over and you just started asking questions. And I think as a leader with high ideation, the power comes when we stop talking and start listening. And we still have to talk to ask the questions. But I think it's really important to ask a question, listen, dialogue, right? Repeat, lather, rinse, repeat in that order, right? And it just gives us some, those questions are powerful. Maika, what do you think about
well, Jim, what you cut on here, I think is so much bigger even than what Maureen started with. So here's what 3 people with ideation can do with an idea. But I mean, Maureen, it wasn't just the idea to take the conversation in a different place. It was, he stayed for 45 minutes of you asking him questions. So you were doing a good job of it. And I love that thought of knowing, really leadership ideation is knowing when it's not about you, right? And being able to be in that present place, in that place that might be confusing to other people, because ideation can follow confusing. It can follow obscure. It can maybe be there fearlessly to really just hear what the ideas are that somebody else has. And it's mutual idea generation there. It's very different than just the fun of let me give you 100 ideas.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And that there is a difference, right? And I think for me, writing helps regulate my ideation, right? So that it becomes something more specific, you know, a sharper pencil than just the plain old idea, right? The plain old ideas are awesome. Oh, I like to write. So I blog too, right? I have a blog. And I find, and there's a book out there. This is, of course, I have an idea. Please let me share my idea. There's a book out there from Peter Drucker, and I think it's called Managing Oneself. I think that's what it's called. It's really little, and it's about this big and thin, and it's got fabulous things. And the first time he wrote something that's the first time I realized about myself, that I learned by writing. I learned by writing. My best learning comes from me putting something on paper. So I start down a path. But so the writing I do has a tendency to be at the intersection of leadership, strengths, and success, I guess I would say.
Or
and
outcomes,
that's
right. I think you're really good at the outcomes part.
I do like the outcomes part, right? So I wrote yesterday about kinship, maybe it was the day before, and the importance of kinship in coaching the problem children. And I've been a problem child. So if you are coaching or leading a problem child, you need the kinship or they will never hear you, right? Because all they ever hear is criticism, because I get a lot of criticism. And so if you have people, and in my world, when I'm working with sports teams, and particularly the male athletes, they are problem children, because the huge majority of them have significance, command, competition, futuristic. These are the problem children. And for coaching to be successful, for success to be achieved, you must find a way to connect with them at a kinship level. And that means believing in them and not giving up on them. So I wrote about that. But my writing is my learning sometimes. And I don't know why, but Peter Drucker wrote that, and it was a really powerful moment for me as a leader to realize that. If I'd have written this interview, we'd have been better. I'd have been better. Okay. But I wouldn't have had as much fun.
Maximizer there.
Do you think you were that bad, Maureen?
It wouldn't have been jazz. We want jazz. What did you say, Jim? I didn't hear you.
Do you think it was bad?
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it was bad.
Right.
Not at all. But
I hear a little maximizer in there.
Yeah,
I do the same thing. We get done with these things, and you're like, oh, I could have said that better. I could have done this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be hard to watch this, right? For me.
Yeah.
It'll be hard to watch this, you know. And I'm afraid that the fellow who said that I'm not a looker, it will be validated.
Oh.
Yikes, what a loser.
You know what? Nobody even knows what that means.
Well, yeah, I knew.
Oh man,
It was-
that's just so weird.
It was.
Let me. We've got just a few minutes here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I blabbered on.
No. Some incredible things that you said in there. So don't feel that way at all. Well, one of the things I think people think is of ideation, Maika, you can weigh in on this too, that it's destabilizing, right? That when I'm generating ideas, it destabilizes. That's why the pastor left. I don't think it has to be destabilizing. And Maureen, let me ask you, how do you think in that context you bring stability even though you're generating ideas around this? One of them, I think, is you listen and write things down. Any other thoughts on that, of bringing stability to a group and yet letting that ideation flow?
I think one of the key things, and this is where individualization helps me, is reading what's happening, right? If and both for the positive and the negative. I was part of a nonprofit before I rejoined IBM. I was a board member of a nonprofit, and we raised money for hospice. And I had ideas on how to do it better. And this woman who was the chairperson, and looking back, she probably had discipline, deliberative, any number of really structured things, which are fabulous, right? But I was very destabilizing for her. If I even asked a question in a meeting about how to do something differently, you could just see her whole face go, oh my God. So I finally went up to her, and with my low harmony, I took some time to think this through. I went up to her and said, Linda, do my ideas upset you? And she said, oh, in her heart, her hand kind of fluttered by her heart. Every time you open your mouth, my heart stops. I was like, oh, well, that's certainly I had no idea I had that much power over anybody, first of all. And second of all, that I didn't fit into that group, right? Now, when they let me run, which one person finally did, we raised $95,000, more than they'd ever raised. At a women that 600 women came to a luncheon, and we had kind of this whole sales of like people selling their wares around it. We raised $95K, more than they'd ever had. But we had to go to a new hotel, which I helped find, and there was resistance to that. We had to do things differently. And they only did it once, and then they went back to the old way. And I moved on. So it can be destabilizing, even if it's not destabilizing. I mean, that was a good thing to do. To them, it feels destabilizing. Right? So there is the reality of the destabilizing, and then there's also if it's not the right group, or I haven't quite presented it correctly, or any number of ways. But I think key is being able to recognize when things are going south, other than having, the man say to you, you don't know what you're talking about, you're not Freud. That I knew was going south, but I didn't see it coming, especially when I saw his strength results.
Well,
and that's
groups have to be ready for that. Just because you have great ideas, if the group is not ready or is not receiving them, it's not a guaranteed success. It's not because you're a consultant and you got great ideas does not mean the group is going to automatically,
absolutely,
oh, the savior is here, we're fixed, right? Especially the worse the scenario, right? The more difficult the scenario you're going into. You mentioned this in the group that the auto manufacturer, where they had not been kind to each other before. That's a very tense group, and so the more difficult it is, sometimes the less ideas they need at the start. I think, Maureen, you locked up. Can you still hear us? Okay.
Yeah, now I can. Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I think you've realized this. The more difficult the group, or the more problems they've had in the past, sometimes I think we need to pull back. I've made that mistake thinking they hired me to solve problems. No, they actually hired me to heal first.
Yeah.
You need to listen and heal so people will be receptive to those ideas. You can't just come in and blast. You've got to make sure that they're fine with each other, and that takes a whole nother set of skills to get that done. Maika?
I think it's realizing too that ideation isn't the end goal.
That's right.
Ideation can be super, super messy. And there are some people, to your individualization point or how it lands, that number one is probably the most important thing to pay attention to. There's some people who can handle the mess. There are other people who need to be brought in after it's been messy. But I think even at the end of it, being creative gets you nowhere. And you can stabilize a relationship. You can stabilize a situation if you can first agree, where are we going?
Right.
I'm going to get there by
critical.
being creative and messy. If you want to be in on that, I'll welcome you. If that's not okay with you, just let me go away and be creative and messy, and I'll come back when we're closer to where we're going.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that gets to Benedict's question here. He picked something out of the insight guide saying needed to partner with strong analytical. His question was, how do you get people to realize why they need it? And I almost want to say, not everybody needs to realize that they need innovation. Maybe it's a secret superpower. Maybe you come up with innovation in a way that doesn't feel quite so jarring, and maybe it doesn't feel quite so innovative if people aren't ready for that. But I think you're going to lose if you think that creativity in itself is what you're aiming for.
I think
Guys,
that's a great point.
we could ideate, which is what we're doing about ideation.
Don't stop.
I know, but we are at the end. Otherwise, I have to have a shred of discipline, which none of us have.
Clearly.
Maureen,
You might have the most, but we're interviewing you. It's my job. Maika, as we think about wrapping this up, any final thoughts? And let's thank Maureen for coming.
Yeah, I think we can just speed right ahead to thanking Maureen. Maureen, you've done a great job, I think, of not only thinking ahead and going through the mess of what you're going to say and then figuring out how to say it for ideation, but really demonstrating it in real time. And that takes some courage. I have so many more questions I want to ask you about ideation. And that is exactly where I think you should leave people with ideation, is wanting more. So thank you for the work that you do. Thanks for the value add that your ideation, among with the other themes, but primarily that beautiful creativity that you bring to things. It leaves people in a different place than they started out, closer to improving their performance. Thanks for being our guest today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you both. I love you both dearly, and this is always a blast. And we said we're getting the band back together, right? When we did this, we didn't come up with a name for our band.
It's got to be
So
something
we'll have to
jazzy.
ideate on that. Something jazzy. Thank you. You're both wonderful, and I've had a great experience.
Maureen, great to have you. I'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center. We have a lot there, gallupstrengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments if you'd like to be a guest blogger. Maybe you have an idea for a blog. Write that down. Send it in to us, coaching@gallup.com. Put guest blogger in the subject line, and that'll make its way over to Maika and can be considered. So we'd appreciate it if you do that. Don't forget, you can catch all the recorded audio and video of this program. We call those podcasts now, and I think more and more people know what those are. They're available for you on your phone if you just want to download them. Many of you like to watch us on YouTube as well, and that's okay. You can subscribe to that channel if you want to get it there. You can get all the links at coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup Certified Strength Coach, you can see a list of all the courses that lead to that certification, and even some additional courses we have available that's out there now. It's all on our courses page. We made it really difficult to remember. Courses.gallup.com. Easy place to go and get it done. If you found this helpful, and I hope you did, we'd ask that you would share it, and we'll look forward to the next theme Thursday. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.